All right. Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a fantastic day. I want to share a couple of interesting stats with you as we kick off here. So, this is in 2016. So, these are 2016 revenues. All right. The box office in 2016 was $38.3 billion. Now, this is interesting. I didn't see this one coming. The video game industry, so interactive entertainment, which includes consoles, it includes mobile games, all this kind of fun stuff. $91 billion. $91 billion, which is crazy. I did not think that video games would be like three times, almost three times, generating almost three times the amount of revenue as the box office. So crazy. So video games are huge, huge business. Publishing is a $27.9 billion industry, which is huge. And actually, one thing that I found heartening was that bestsellers, hardback books, they are actually on the up and up. There have been 3 consecutive years of gains in the publishing industry, which I think is very, very cool. And hello, everyone. I see you guys hopping on. Thanks so much for the shout out. Let me know if I'm coming through clear. I'm doing something a little bit, I've got kind of a neat setup I'll show you guys later. You might want to experiment with yourself. So I told you all these revenue numbers and what I should have done. Okay, here's a little storytelling trick for you guys. Contrast is everything. And so what I should have done preparing for today's call, I gave you all those entertainment figures. Massive. I mean, we're talking in the hundreds of billions of dollars probably for the entire entertainment industry. And what I should have done is compared that to some other industries so that we could see, like, it would be curious, I know like Apple's revenue, like how, for instance, entertainment stacks up against Apple's revenue, right? Because Apple, Google actually might be now the most profitable company in the world, but Apple and Google, they're always right there. So anyway, contrast is everything. So I should compare those two, because I think what we would find is that stories, right? Because all of these mediums, whether it's movies, video games, books, I mean, with few exceptions, right? I mean, perhaps a chemistry book, you could argue, well, that's not really a story. That's not really a narrative. But for the most part, overwhelmingly, those are all story-based. That's the entertainment industry, right? What is entertainment? Entertainment is simply stories. And I would be really curious to see how the entertainment industry stacks up against some of the other industries out there. And I have a feeling that it would stack up very well. And I think that we would see that our world is very much powered by story. And actually, what's interesting, if we want to talk about it, but money. I wish I had a dollar bill here for effect. There's another storytelling trick for you: is have some props. But money, right? I got a quarter sitting here in my little quarter jar. Money, of course, is a collective story, right? I mean, money, it has no value other than the value of which we assign. So stories are really powering the world. I mean, the world is powered by stories. And what's interesting, of course, about the story of money is that we can all get on board with the story of money, right? They're really, and I mean, there could be some culture in a very remote part of the world that isn't essentially on board with the notion of money. But pretty much money is one of the most successful stories that's ever been told. Pretty much all around the world, everyone can agree, like, hey, money's a good thing, and we're gonna trade and we're gonna barter and we're gonna do that via money. So the world really truly is powered by stories. And what I want to talk to you about today, and I didn't introduce myself, I wanted to go straight in, another storytelling tip for you. I wanted to go straight into some content instead of doing an introduction to kind of set the scene, if you will. My name is Andrew Drawn. I am the Director of Content here at Elite Marketing Pro. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is one of our daily dose of awesome broadcast, and this is 10, 15, sometimes a little bit more, especially when it's me. I tend to be a little bit long-winded. Minutes of inspiration and education and motivation to get your day going straight. And I love sharing these little knowledge bombs with you guys. And as you can see, hanging out in my car at the moment where it's nice and quiet, because I have a little one upstairs who tends to be a little bit rowdy, and you just never know when he's going to be in in a good or a bad mood. So stories, right? Stories, they sell, they're powering the world, and it doesn't matter what kind of technology, right? As soon as we invent new technologies as humans, we are finding new ways to tell stories with those technologies. So, VR is probably going to be a huge thing, right? The next 10, 20 years, we're going to be living in really interesting times. And VR, right? Virtual reality is going to be a huge new part of our world and what people are doing for recreation and entertainment, or at least that's what people suspect. They've thought that in the past. It didn't materialize, but it seems like these days we might be headed on a collision course for like the Matrix, right, where like everyone's kind of plugged in. Who knows? We'll all maybe be working seriously remotely, in our little Matrix tub. Who knows, right? But the world, it's going to be interesting. This is going to be a very interesting century. And for those of you who are, of course, on here live with me and experiencing the century, we're in for hopefully a treat. But it's going to be a wild ride. So stories. I want to talk about today how to tell your story. Okay, now this is really important because as we know, stories they're powerful. There's really nothing better for building rapport, and really what it comes down to is sharing. And the kind of the crux of what I want to get at today is vulnerability and the importance of vulnerability and how that is really the thing that's going to create that empathetic response in your audience. And in order to kind of be vulnerable, you have to kind of share some of the challenges that you've experienced. And there's kind of an effective way to do that and kind of an ineffective way to do that. But really, you kind of have to like dive in and feel comfortable with sharing some things that, perhaps ordinarily you might be, I don't know, you might be a little embarrassed by, you might, you might not want to divulge some of these details, but it really is when you open up and you share with folks these often kind of painful moments from your life that they go, oh, wow. And then they really start relating to you, and you can really kind of establish yourself as a human being, someone that they care about, someone that they're kind of rooting for, and someone they want to get to know more about. Because most conversation, right, that happens in the world it's just very like surface level stuff, right? It's kind of chit chatty, and that's good. I mean, there's a very functional reason for that. We can't all go around, telling these really heavy narratives about our lives, just kind of in our day to day back and forth. But this is where you kind of cut through, and when you really open up and you really get vulnerable and you really get authentic with people, that's when people really start paying attention and they go, wow, this is different. This is different than what I'm used to. This is kind of a different kind of experience. So again, I want to talk about how to do this in an effective way, because there's a really important distinction that you guys want to think about. And, sharing challenges and struggles is different than essentially complaining, right? And I would never, of course, accuse any of you guys of complaining, but I want to kind of give this distinction of, here's kind of what complaining is on one hand, and here's what being kind of vulnerable and sharing challenges and frustrations and pains that you've experienced is on the other hand. And really what it comes down to is when you're complaining, that's kind of just a space of I'm not really moving anywhere. I'm not taking any action. I'm not doing anything to change my circumstances. That's kind of complaining. Complaining are these stories that kind of allow us to be stuck and not really do anything different. And I don't think any single person that's on this call today is in that category of complaining. Because if you're here, right, then you are looking to make changes in your life. You're looking to build a business, change the lives for yourself, for your family. I mean, you're making things happen. So you guys are certainly not complainers, but I guarantee you all know some complainers. And again, complaining is when you're sharing essentially stories. Maybe they're real, maybe they're false, and they're not for the purpose of moving anywhere. You're in inaction when you're complaining. Now, on the other hand, when you're being vulnerable and you're sharing challenges, this is a place of movement, and this is kind of what I want to share with you guys. You have all solved problems in your lives, okay? So when you're opening up and you're being vulnerable and you're sharing with people, that means that you're in a place where you have solved some problems. Everyone has solved some problems in their life, right? I'm going to kind of help you think about some of the problems that you've solved in your life, but everyone has solved problems, okay? We've all solved problems, and you are infinitely more qualified to speak to the problems which you have solved in your life than anyone else, right? You're an expert on the things that you have found solutions to. And what's really cool, people come to Elite Marketing Pro, people come to, online business in general because they're looking to achieve different things, right? We all have different backstories, right? We're all kind of uniquely, essentially qualified. We have all kinds of people here in Elite Marketing Pro community. We have folks in real estate. We have obviously a lot of network marketers, but it's really, there's a huge spectrum. Back when I was doing a lot of calls with our community, I was talking to guys in the oil and gas industry who were like, offshore rigs off of like Australia. And they're like, you know what? I'm just really tired of doing this. This is really hard work. I want to do something online. I want to build an online business. I talk to people in tech and IT, and they're like, you know what? I'm tired of being a cubicle slave. Our very own Fernie Ceballos, our CMO here at Elite Marketing Pro, he was a cubicle slave. And actually one of the things that we're doing, I don't know if I should let this cat out of the bag, but I think I'm going to do it anyway. We are actually designing some sales materials and funnels for people that are in the cubicle slave space, right? So for those people that are, they're in the cubicle, they're discontent, they want something else. We're actually designing a funnel specifically for that target market. So if that's you and you're in that space, then of course, you're uniquely qualified to speak to those people because you've already found Elite Marketing Pro, right? You found essentially, you were out there, you were being proactive, you were looking for a solution, and now you have something. Now you kind of know, here is an avenue. Here's something that I found that works, that has either gotten me out of that situation or is in the process of getting you. Oh, and Cecilia says, that's me. Perfect. So look, here it is. So if you're a cubicle slave and you said, I want something different with my life, and then you found Elite Marketing Pro, then you essentially have found a solution. You are taking action. You are moving forward. And now you can share some of those kind of things that were discontent about being a cubicle slave. And you can do that in a very authentic way. Much better, of course, than I could, because I don't have that lived firsthand experience. I can conceptually imagine, like, oh, I think I know what being a cubicle slave was probably about. And actually, it's starting to get a little toasty in my car here. I can say, like, I think I know what being a cubicle slave is all about. But I really don't have, like, I really can't share, and really be vulnerable with someone, especially if I was like on video, right? And being like, well, back when I was sitting in my office and I was just like watching the seconds, tick by on the clock or whatever it is, you know what I mean? Like whatever you do, tapping your thumb or, not liking your manager or whatever it is. I can't share those things. That's not my lived experience. So I can't be terribly authentic with that, but you can. And so what's really cool is that's going to allow you to really connect with people that are also in that space, and then also provide them the solution which you found, which probably, if we're having this conversation, is Elite Marketing Pro. And so that's really cool. And every single person on the Elite Marketing Pro team, every single person has some kind of backstory where they experienced some challenges along the way. Like I mentioned, Fernie Ceballos. Fernie went to MIT, graduated from MIT, became a Google slave, and was like, hey, I'm like literally living the American dream, but it's just not quite what I thought it was going to be, right? I got this fantastic education, I got a really good job, and I'm not happy. So what's up with that, right? So that was Fernie's story. Now Fernie has, of course, gone on over the past decade to now be a partner here at Elite Marketing Pro, right? We've got Chef, right? Chef was a chef at Disney, and Chef said, wow, I'm just really tired of working these extremely long hours and killing my feet and being what I presume is like really, really hot. You're wearing your chef outfit and you're in a kitchen, which Lord knows a kitchen's got to be like 200 degrees, right? So she was tired of that, right? Tim Erlay, right? Tim had numerous struggles along the way. And if you've watched any of our sales presentations, you've heard Fernie and Tim share their stories. But literally every single person on the team, and myself, I was a construction worker, and so I'm very familiar with the struggles and the pains of being in that space, right? So think about your own life. Think about what, essentially what problems have you solved for yourself? What are some things that you can authentically share about your experience? And that's really what's going to cause people to relate to you. And actually, it even goes down to a biological level where we have, and I've spoken about this before, but we have in our brains, in our limbic systems, we have something called mirror neurons. And that literally allows, have you ever, here's a good example. Have you ever watched like a baseball game or something and maybe someone gets, maybe someone, gets hurt, right? Hey, there's Fernie, right? You ever been watching a baseball game or other kind of sporting event, and then someone gets injured, right? And all of a sudden, you just go like, ugh, right? You cringe because you're like, oh my gosh, that looks so incredibly painful. That is a part of our brain. That is mirror neurons, and they are firing, and they create and allow us to experience empathy. And so empathy is actually literally hardwired into your brain. And so, the obvious example, of course, is when you see someone, take a spill and you're like, oh gosh, cringe. That looks like it really, really hurt. That's mirror neurons firing. Same thing goes when someone's opening up and they're really authentically sharing a story with you, and they're being vulnerable, right? You can actually physically feel that person's emotions. I mean, unless you're like a sociopath, right? But you can literally feel that person's emotions. And so that's the space you want to get into, and that's where you want to be sharing from, and that's where people are going to really connect with you, is when you open up. And when you really get a little bit vulnerable and you really get authentic with your story. Now, one thing I did want to share with you guys, which is cool, is a little bit about what's called the shapes of stories. Now, this is something that comes from a very prominent author by the name of Kurt Vonnegut. You guys have probably heard the name Kurt Vonnegut, of course, the author of Slaughterhouse-Five, Cat's Cradle, Sirens of Titan, many, many others. And his thesis, actually, when he was in school, which was actually funny enough, his thesis was rejected. But what he did is he looked at stories, and he looked at what he called the shapes of stories. And you can actually plot on an XY graph, you can kind of plot the shape of a story. So on one axis, we have time. So, starting here and then moving this way, we have the axis of time. And then here we have the axis of emotion, right? So up here is kind of peak emotional. This is a good emotional experience. Down here is a negative emotional experience. And what we have is a lot of stories that conform to oh, it is backwards. I forgot about that. I apologize, everyone. Just Google this, all right? So if you're watching along with me, Google Kurt Vonnegut, the shapes of stories, and you can see this not backwards. But this is what I had to work with today, hanging out here in my car, here in my garage. Some of you will get that one. Okay, so shapes of stories, right? So what you have, again, on the axis, you have time and you have emotion, and you have a couple of different tropes, right? Like stories follow just a couple of very standard tropes, and they have since the very beginning of time, right? We keep telling essentially the same stories over and over and over and over. And I mentioned this actually in a recent email. In the 20th century, there were some authors that realized that we've been telling the same stories over and over and over, and they wanted to do something a little bit different. And so you had people like Faulkner, you had James Joyce, and you had kind of this very free associative verse that was written. It's extremely hard to relate to, right? Like nobody reads that stuff because it's not fun, right? It's not an enjoyable experience, right? When you're not focused on a central character, and that central character essentially contending with some pain, struggles, and frustrations, and then kind of coming out on the other side, either most of the time better, but sometimes worse for it, then you can't even really relate to these stories. So no one reads these things. Oh, thank you. Who shared the link, so you guys can see this. So there are a couple different kind of standard kind of tropes. We've got the man in hole, right? Man in hole. This is of course a classic. This is at the beginning where you suffer from some kind of ill fortune, and then you have to struggle through that ill fortune, and then you come out on the other side better for it, right? So the emotional arc starts out like, hey, life's going along pretty peachy cool, and then all of a sudden, oh, something really bad happens. But then we learn a lot. And we understand some things about ourselves, and we come out the other side better for it. So we peak on the other side. Now, this is another classic one. We have boy meets girl. Boy meets girl. How many rom-coms, right? Like how many rom-coms have you guys seen where the plot is always boy meets girl, they have an amazing time, and then he does something, he screws it up, and then all of a sudden, everything falls apart, but then they reconcile at the end, and then presumably live happily ever after, right? Like every single one I've ever seen anyway. I'm not a connoisseur of the genre, but everyone I've ever seen follows the exact same story. Boy meets girl. It's awesome. Then he screws it up. Oh, terrible. And then they get back together, and then they are happy ever after, right? Cinderella. Now check this out. Cinderella. I don't know if you guys knew this. I didn't know this till I was looking this up. Cinderella, the Cinderella narrative, exists in almost all cultures all around the world. right? Almost every single culture, going back to like ancient China, it's in the Middle East, it's everywhere, India, has a Cinderella narrative. And of course, we're familiar with the European version, kind of passed down through Brothers Grimm, and that's kind of version we're familiar with. But every culture has a Cinderella story, and of course, it's such a a common story trope, right? That we even use it in terms of talking about sports teams, and of course, as we know, Cinderella, it starts out really bad. People are super mean to me. I'm being picked on. But then all of a sudden, a series of events come along, and I'm starting to gain a little bit of momentum. And then I get the invitation to the ball. I get the dress. Things are really come together. You got the fairy godmother. You go to the ball, but then the clock strikes midnight, right? And then when the clock strikes midnight, we crash down before finally reuniting and living happily ever after with the Prince Charming character. Every single culture in the world has that story. Now, you might think, oh, well, how does this apply to business? Well, I'll get there in 1 second, because we're not actually going to talk about this final story, because that's actually not a positive story. We're only going to be sharing essentially positive stories here when we're talking about ourselves to relate to our prospects, because and actually one of the reasons I mentioned this is because I wanted to show you guys that regardless of what type of story you're telling and what kind of sort of emotional arc you're creating for your audience, you want to make sure you're taking them to, right? You're taking them to a place of positivity, you're taking them to a place of solution, right? There's a story formula actually that we use in copywriting, which is problem, agitate, solution, right? You introduce a problem, then you agitate that problem, you really make that problem salient, right? You really fire those mirror neurons, and you make the person, watching your video or reading your sales letter, you really make them feel that problem, and you really make them think, gosh, I need to do something about this problem now, and then you offer the solution, right? That's one of the classic copywriting formulas, been around forever. And of course it shares a lot in common with some of these story tropes. So again, most people's stories are going to look something like this. They're going to look something like Man in the Hole, where it's like your life's going along, you're frustrated, but you choose to make a difference. You choose to make some different choices in your life. You find something like Elite Marketing Pro, online marketing and advertising, and then you have a turning point. Life starts changing. That's typically going to be the narrative you're going to share. But it can also be, this is kind of a fun one. So Cinderella actually applies. Think about the story of Steve Jobs, right? Like Steve Jobs, back in the 80s, was in control of Apple. Things were going pretty well. But remember when he got ousted from Apple? He got ousted from the company. So meteoric rise followed by just a tremendous fall. But then, of course, he comes back and saves Apple, right? Comes back when Apple is, I forget which year it was, but they were experiencing some terrible financial hardships. He comes back, provides the vision, saves the company. Classic Cinderella story right there, even though we don't necessarily think of Steve Jobs as a Cinderella story, but that is a Cinderella story. You could also, a lot of marketers, you guys have maybe even heard a story about this. Think about, like Wolf of Wall Street guy, right? Think about anyone in that kind of category where it's like, at one time they're on top of the world, but maybe they're doing some kind of like black hat stuff. Maybe they're doing some stuff that's kind of not cool, and they have a big crash, but then they repent their ways, and then all of a sudden the story is headed back up to a more positive place. Right, so there are all kinds of different ways that you can do this. There are all kinds of different ways you can be telling the story. But of course, the point is we want to make sure that we're going in a really positive direction with those stories, and we want to make sure that, of course, our story has a point. Right, we need to be purposefully telling our stories, and of course, the purpose is to get to whatever solution that you want to be offering. So it's always where you're headed. But again, don't ever feel. And actually, I wrote an email. Because I can, of course, speak personally about this, but I wrote an email, a while back, kind of sharing my story. I need to do something with it more than just that email, because anytime you really get vulnerable, it's so captivating, right? People are just so kind of drawn into all of those challenges, because that's really where credibility comes from. Are you going to listen to someone that's never experienced some challenges and some bumps along their journey? It's like, no. That is where credibility comes from, and that is where, again, we really start relating to people, and that's where we really start kind of caring, right? That's, again, what is a mirror neuron? A mirror neuron is what's literally causing you to feel a similar emotion to another human being, and then you start caring. You actually really want there to be a positive resolution to their story, so you really become emotionally engaged and involved, and that's where you want, folks, because you can't move people to do anything unless you've really activated their emotions, right? We are emotional creatures, and that is so important to always remember, even when we're using Like I opened up this Daily Dose of Awesome with some stats, just, kind of for fun, because stats can also bring credibility, right? It shows the person, when you're throwing out some stats, it shows you've done some research, shows you have some authority and some knowledge on your subject matter. So it's always good to pepper in some stats, but really what it comes down to, the thing that's really going to make people move is emotion. It's not logic. They've even actually done a study, might have to do a future Daily Dose of Awesome on this. They did a study recently, you can probably easily find this, where they found that facts actually literally, because this is kind of an interesting thing in our current kind of political media climate, where we're having a really weird time with facts right now, where it's kind of, figuring out who is actually presenting factual information versus really, really, really biased information is challenging, right? And I'm not going to get political with this. I'm not going to go into whichever camp you happen to be. But we have the whole fake news thing, and one side is saying this is fake news, and another side is saying that's fake news, and all of a sudden there's just a ton of confusion about where are the facts, right? So yeah, I mean, facts are important, but facts don't actually change anyone's mind. Again, they did a study recently. I think I read about it perhaps in the Atlantic, and it just demonstrated very conclusively that the facts are not very persuasive, right? Facts do not change someone's mind. So even though facts can give you some credibility and make you look like a fairly sharp person, that's not what's going to move the needle for you. And so you want to have that, but it's the emotional stuff that's really going to create results and sales in your business. And if you want to learn how to really effectively use story, and you want to learn from a master storyteller, I highly recommend that you check out our AMF, our Attraction Marketing 10-day boot camp. You can get that by going to elitemarketingpro.com/go. You'll get a free, 100% free 10-day series written by our good friend, Mr. Fernie Ceballos. And it's awesome. You're going to learn all about using story, where and how to leverage stories in your business, and how all of that works. So if you've not already signed up for the bootcamp, I highly recommend you do so. It can do really, really powerful things for your business and really show you what good storytelling looks like and how you can leverage that and leverage your story and connect with more people and build your audience and build your business and, of course, make more revenue. So elitemarketingpro.com/go, elitemarketingpro.com/go to get the bootcamp. And that's what I have for you today. Wanted to share some thoughts about stories. It's a topic that I'm obviously very passionate about and love speaking about. And it's something literally, I mean, again, it's one of the biggest industries in the world, and there's always more to learn, and I think it's very, very cool. So with that said, I don't even know how long I've gone, probably too long, because that tends to be my my pattern. But I hope you guys have it's Monday, so I hope you guys kick off the week and have a fantastic week. Go out there and make it happen, and be sharing your stories. If you are hopping on some Facebook Lives, get vulnerable. If you're writing some emails to your list, get vulnerable. Share some stuff. Share some pains and challenges and frustrations that you've experienced, because that's the good stuff. That's what makes people really perk their ears up, pay attention, and get emotionally involved and invested. So that's my challenge to you. Have a fantastic week, everybody. We'll talk soon.